I'd just like to show you the in-camera menu setup for streaming via IP using the Lumix BGH1. First thing you want to do is open Lumix Tether for multicam, because this allows us to control the camera's menu and get things set up very easily. With Lumix Tether for multicam open, you get confronted with this control panel, and we're going to click LV for live view. When we do that, we get to see whatever the camera is pointing at, which is me, which is very exciting. But slightly more importantly, here we get access to the menu. So if we click the menu, here we have the camera's menu, and we can navigate this using the Lumix Tether for multicam display on our main monitor, which is very cool. Go down to the custom settings, and we're going to choose the LAN Wi-Fi section. Open here, and we have a number of choices. Let's look at the LAN setup, because that's what we're most interested in here. We have a choice, first of all, whether we're going to use DHCP client to allow the system to allocate an IP address to the camera, or we can set a static IP address. If we want to set a static IP address, we click and go into here, and then you can write your IP address in here. If you switch from DHCP client to static IP address, you will need to restart the camera. But that's okay, that's not a big deal, it doesn't take very long. I'm going to stick with DHCP client because I've got no reason to have a static IP address on my setup. Just going back one, we want to check the IP address that's been assigned to the camera, or that we've assigned to it. So go into your network address display for LAN, and here we have your IP address. You'll need to make a note of this because you will need it later on when you type in the address of the camera into your software so that it can pick up the stream incoming. Go back twice, and then we'll look at our streaming setup. Obviously, if we're going to stream with the camera, we want the streaming function set to on, and then we can choose our streaming quality. I'm using H.265 4K 25p at 12.5 megabits per second. I found for my own network, this is the setting that gives me the best results. But as you can see, there are lots of higher quality settings and lower quality settings depending on what the stream's for, but also the infrastructure that you're using. You've got an RTSP port as well, which is set by default to 554. No real need to change that. Once you've done this, you are now ready to stream. Once your camera's plugged into your network switch, you're ready to go. I'll show you how to connect it to OBS. You'll need a new source for the camera, and it's a media source. So you select that, and your properties window will open. Here in the input window, you need to type in RTSP : / then the IP address of your camera / and then the word stream. Also click use hardware decoding when available, and this will help your system cope with resolution and higher data rates. Once you've got that set up, click apply, and that should pull your camera into your OBS window. And here we are streaming in 4K in H.264 and 25p and at 25 megabits a second. The camera is streaming via the Ethernet into the network and coming back into OBS where it's been recorded. As you may well have noticed, there's a bit of a lag between the audio and the video, and that's because the audio is being recorded directly into OBS and the video is being recorded via the network. We can solve this, of course, by plugging the microphone into the camera. Right now we're recording in 4K in H.265 at 50p and 50 megabits per second. I've got the microphone plugged directly into the XLR adapter on the BGH1 so that the delay between the audio and the video is completely eliminated. You may have noticed that there's a little bit of interference at this highest resolution rate and the highest data rate. So I'm going to turn that down a little bit to see if I can find the right level for my system to cope. But in between the interference, you can see the quality that's possible using this setup. Okay, here I've just dropped the frame rate to 25p and the data rate to 25 megabits per second. We're still in 4K and we're still in H.265, and I think this, for my system, this is working. I can't see any interference on the screen, and we're still, oh, there we go. We get a little bit of, here I'm recording in 4K H.265, and I've dropped the frame rate down to 25p, and the data rate is 12.5 megabits per second. It seems that this setting is low enough for my system to be able to cope. I think we've still got the nice quality that you get from H.265 and from 4K, but with the data rate this low, 12.5 megabits per second, my network's being able to cope, it seems, and we don't have any of that interference. So it's a question really of experimenting with your network and the settings in the camera to see what data rate your network can cope with. And for comparison, here is the same setup, but using the HDMI cable plugged into a video capture card. This is obviously giving me much lower resolution. My capture card only outputs HD. So the streaming method via the Ethernet will give us much higher resolution. Again, I'm plumbed straight into the camera with the microphone, but using this method, it's much easier to sync audio and video when you're using a separate audio source, as I would normally. But for this exercise, I'm going straight into the camera with the XLR adapter. Key difference, obviously, is the resolution, the amount of detail that you get, and the smoothness of the tonal transitions. I used to think this looked pretty high resolution, but compared to the 4K streaming via the Ethernet from the BGH1, it looks a little bit primitive. Here I'm recording in 4K H.265, but using the HD frame rate down to 25p, and the data rate is 12.5 megabits per second. Resolution, my capture card only it seems that this setting is low enough for my streaming method.